No, there's been no exposure to Zubr in Gibraltar because Zubr was applied for a DLT license in somebody else's name. And when they got the license, it was then passed on to FTX. So that requires a further permission from the regulator, which they hadn't got. As a result of that, Zubr has no clients, no exposure, no risk, because they've never traded. So on that basis, absolutely no exposure at all.
Well, the Bahamas had its own ambitions to become this global crypto hub. They had their own digital assets regulatory framework as well. So, in many ways, there were synergies with Gibraltar. But of course, we've just seen FTX implode in spectacular fashion. So, what would you say are the differences between a jurisdiction like the Bahamas and Gibraltar?
I think the distinction is huge because it very much depends on what regulation they have and what regulation we have. As you know, we have a comprehensive set of regulations which would not have allowed FTX to happen in Gibraltar. Why? Because, for example, one very simple example, any licensee in Gibraltar is required by law to segregate client monies from their own monies. What's clear from reading the reports on FTX is that it appears that money was mixed. That would not have been allowed under our regime, and the regulator would not have permitted it. You're required to have corporate governance. There's been no corporate governance in FTX. You wouldn't be allowed to transfer monies from one company to another with a single person doing everything. So there are the core principles that we have are designed particularly to stop things like this from happening. What we've always said from word go is if we're going to have a credible jurisdiction in this space, it has to create trust. And by creating trust, you encourage activity. But that trust depends on protecting consumers from precisely this sort of activity. And so if you go through the list of core principles that we have, you will see that they are specifically designed to provide the client, the customer, with some security and some safety, which in this case, there clearly was none.
There are two ways to view the FTX collapse. I suppose you could view it as shining a light on the robust regulation that Gibraltar does have that you've just spoken of, or you could say it's really put doubt on the industry. I mean, there was a lot of doubt in the industry anyway. How do you view FTX's collapse and its impact on the sector?
Look, FTX has gone bankrupt with over 30 billion that they had, I think some 32 billion. It's not that different from Wirecard, which is a traditional financial services firm licensed and authorized in Germany under BaFin, which also was a sham and which also did things in exactly the same way as FTX did in this sector. So the traditional and the innovation in FTX, you still have scandals because they're not regulated properly, or the individuals behind them are allowed to do the sort of things that the FTX individual did as the Wirecard individual did. So I think it's very much, yes, it does shine a light. Yes, standards need to get better. Yes, regulators need to up their game and ensure that they're able to supervise effectively and police and stop this sort of activity. But you know, if you work in a bank and you steal money, no matter how good the regulation is in that country, you'll still steal the money. It's about chasing you afterwards. And so there are certain things that no matter how good the regulatory framework is, there are some things that you just can't stop. But there are a lot of things that you can stop. And so for me, things like corporate governance are absolutely critical. If you don't have people running these businesses that you can trust, if you don't have transparency of information and data, which in this case we clearly did not have, if you don't have client money segregated, which in this case you clearly don't have, then you're asking for trouble. And I think this is the result of that.
Well, you talk about corporate governance, but what about enforcement? Because that goes hand in hand with regulation, doesn't it?
You never stop uh, uh, the work in supervision. And I very much rely on our regulators to keep that going, to keep being intrusive into firms, into how they operate, to ensuring that the standards that we set are being met, and to ensure at all times that the customers' interests are safeguarded wherever possible.
Does Gibraltar have, like other jurisdictions such as Singapore, a watch list of companies, crypto companies, that are not necessarily registered in Gibraltar, but who are actively seeking Gibraltar clients? Is that something that our jurisdiction is looking to do?
Um, I'm not sure how effective a watch list is. People in Gibraltar know and understand that regulated firms are firms that you can trust. If they're not regulated, you should be on alert. You should be on a warning. The only firms that are going to be regulated here are the ones that have been licensed after a long and detailed process, so that we can satisfy ourselves that those people are fit and proper, that those people do have the right business plan, that those people do have the capital adequacy requirements, that they do have the corporate governance. So I think we take a lot of care to ensure that the people that we license are the people that should be licensed, and that people can take comfort from them and trust them. And that's the key. The key is, can you trust a business? And it very much depends on where it's based and where it's regulated, if it's regulated at all. That should be at the forefront of your mind when you work with them.